Lieutenant Caleb Ward opened his eyes to flickering red lights and the sharp hiss of failing life support vents. His head throbbed as he pushed himself up from the cold metal floor of the UEN Resolute, a long-range exploration ship that now groaned with damage. The silence was unnatural. No crew voices, no footsteps, just the low hum of emergency power and distant creaks in the hull. Caleb touched his temple, where a cut bled slowly, then staggered toward a nearby control panel. "Ship status," he muttered. The AI didn't respond. Static filled the small screen, but after a few seconds of fiddling with the manual override, a basic diagnostic report blinked into view. Hull breach in Sector D. Engines offline. Communications severed. Crew status unknown. Caleb's heart sank. He should have seen other survivors by now. He moved carefully through the corridor, past sparking wires and overturned carts. Everything looked abandoned. He passed the med bay empty, except for signs of hasty departure. Scattered tools, broken syringes, a half-used emergency pack. A blood smear stained the far wall. He didn't stop to look closer. Fear sat heavy in his chest, but training kept him focused. He reached the bridge after forcing open a sealed bulkhead with a manual crank. The room was dark, screens broken or black. The captain's chair was empty. He activated a small backup console and played the last log entry. The captain's voice was distorted, but clear enough. "We encountered a spatial anomaly like anything recorded. Sensors failed. We were pulled off course. I've ordered evacuation to the lower decks." Then silence. Caleb leaned back, confused. The lower decks weren't for evacuation. They were for storage and engineering. Why send the crew there? And why hadn't he been woken earlier? He should have been part of any emergency team. The date on the log was 3 days old. He had been unconscious for 3 full days. His panic started to rise, but he pushed it down. First, restore power. Then, find out what happened. He climbed down to engineering, his flashlight cutting a narrow path through darkness. The ship felt bigger now, empty and echoing. At the heart of the engine bay, he found the auxiliary power core flickering. A coolant line had burst, and thick white vapor filled part of the room. As he worked to reconnect the coolant pump, he noticed something strange. Another door was partially open. A maintenance hatch that should have been sealed unless someone had passed through. He hesitated, then pulled the door wide. A blast of cold air hit him. The room beyond was dimly lit in blue. It was one of the ship's stasis chambers, but this one had been scrubbed from the ship's maps. Caleb had never seen it before. Inside, a single pod stood upright, different from standard human models. Sleek, silver lines, glowing runes, and a curved glass panel that showed a figure within a woman. Not human, but close. Skin was silver with a faint shimmer, her long indigo hair floating gently in the cryofluid, her eyes closed in sleep. She looked peaceful, yet powerful, wearing robes woven with threads that caught the light like starlight. Caleb froze. Who was she? Why was she here? This wasn't a rescue mission. No alien passengers had been logged. As he stepped closer, the pod hissed. The lights around its edges blinked green. Soft tone echoed, and then the glass cover slowly rose. The fluid drained away, and the woman's eyes snapped open, bright violet and glowing faintly. Caleb stepped back in shock as she took a single step forward, barefoot, unsteady. She looked around, locking eyes with him. She didn't speak, but she didn't seem afraid. Instead, her gaze was calm, focused. She pointed to her throat, then to him, then made a swirling motion in the air. Caleb understood. He reached into his toolkit and pulled out a universal translator, military grade, fast syncing. He clipped it to his collar and activated it. "Oh." The device chirped, scanning her speech as she finally spoke. Her voice was melodic, calm, but firm. "Do not fear. I mean no harm." Caleb nodded slowly, still stunned. "Who are you?" he asked. She looked around again, then back at him. "I am Princess Nyera, of the Varelian Ascendancy. I was hidden here, Cape Death." The translator struggled for a moment, then corrected the phrase, "to escape extinction." Caleb blinked. The Varelians were thought to be myth, an ancient species wiped out a century ago in a galactic war. Yet here she stood real, alive, and on his ship. "How did you get here?" he asked, but she stepped past him, eyes scanning the chamber, touching a panel on the wall that activated a hidden star map. "Your ship was chosen," she said. "A place where they would never look, but they are hunting me still." Caleb didn't understand who they were, but something in her voice sent a chill down his spine. Before he could ask more, the lights above flickered violently, then dimmed. A sharp noise echoed through the ship, a clank, distant, metallic. Caleb turned toward the sound. Nyera didn't flinch. Instead, she moved to a console and touched it with her palm. The system lit up under her fingers, responding to her presence. "They may already be here," she said, voice grim. "We must move." Caleb's world had already turned upside down, but now it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. He followed her out of the stasis room, both of them stepping into the unknown together. Somewhere deep in the ship, something stirred, and they were no longer alone. Caleb moved through the shadowed corridor with Princess Nyera close behind. Both of them, quiet as the cold steel walls of the UN Resolute, groaned under invisible pressure. Lights flickered above their heads, and the air felt heavy, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. Caleb didn't fully trust the alien princess walking beside him, but something about her calm, graceful presence made him feel less alone. She walked barefoot, her silver skin catching the glow of emergency lights, her eyes alert, scanning every corner. They reached a control room near the ship's core systems, and Caleb quickly sealed the door behind them. The room was cramped, but functional. Wires hung loose from the ceiling, and dust floated in the stale air. He powered up a terminal with a crank battery and waited for the data to load. Nyera stood by silently, then approached and placed her hand on a section of the panel Caleb had never noticed. A secret file opened, displaying a strange energy map filled with symbols he couldn't read. "This is what they want," she said softly. Caleb frowned. "Who are they?" Nyera looked at him, and for the first time, her voice trembled. "The Karn Dominion. They destroyed my world. They hunted my family. I am the last." The translator stuttered slightly on the word last, but the meaning was clear. Caleb leaned forward. Why hide on a human ship? Why not go to one of the council worlds? Nyera hesitated, then whispered, "Because the council betrayed us. And your kind once stood with mine. Long ago." Caleb blinked. He had never heard of any ancient alliance between humans and Varelians. He thought their empire was a legend, something from deep space myths. She moved to another panel and opened a compartment with a glowing crystal inside, pulsing like a heartbeat. "This is a relic," she explained. "It contains the memory of our people. It must survive, even if I do not." Caleb didn't know what to say. The ship moaned again, and a sudden tremor ran through the floor. They both looked up. Something had connected to the Resolute. The proximity alert had no sound, but the screen in front of them blinked red. Caleb typed fast, trying to locate the source. A docking clamp had been triggered Sector H, far from the bridge. "We need to move," he said, grabbing a utility belt and slinging a plasma tool over his shoulder. Nyera nodded. She carried no weapons, only the relic, which she placed into a small carrier that attached to her waist. As they stepped into the hall again, Caleb asked, "Can you fight?" Nyera gave him a small smile. "I can survive." That wasn't an answer, but it was enough. They passed through ruined mess halls and dark crew quarters, every room colder than the last. Caleb remembered the faces of the people who once filled this ship: scientists, engineers, officers, now gone, perhaps dead, or worse. Niera, suddenly, raised a hand, stopping him. "Listen," she whispered. Caleb held his breath. A faint clicking sound echoed from down the corridor. Not mechanical, more like claws on metal. They ducked into a side maintenance room, heartbeats pounding. The sound passed, slow and steady, not searching, but patrolling. Caleb peered through a small crack in the door and saw something move in the dark. Not a person. A machine, but unlike any he had seen. It was tall and insect-like, with long limbs and glowing eyes, scanning the corridor with a red light. "Nair," whispered Karn Probe. "It should not be here." Caleb's mind raced. The Karns had already boarded. Then they had followed her signal. Or perhaps the relic had called them. "We can't go back," he said. "Engineering is the only way forward." "Okay?" Ira nodded, and they slipped through the maintenance crawl space, crawling on hands and knees while the ship creaked around them. The tight tunnel opened into a vertical shaft, and they climbed slowly, one rung at a time, until they reached the second level. Here, the lights were completely dead. Caleb activated his wrist lamp, and shadows danced around them. Reach. A blast door marked secured cargo. Caleb had never been inside. It was locked to command level access, but Naira touched it, and the door opened like it knew her. Inside, Caleb found more than he expected. Telian Tech-Varelian designs mixed with human systems, almost like an old lab hidden from the rest of the crew. "How much do you know about this ship?" he asked. Niara's face was unreadable, enough to say it was not meant only for exploration. "Someone on your side wanted this cargo kept hidden. They helped us once, then they vanished." Caleb examined a console in the center of the room. It wasn't human. The design was smooth and glowing, responding to his touch strangely. He felt warmth under his palm, and suddenly images flashed before his eyes, memories that weren't his. Massive cities in the sky, silver towers glowing under twin suns, fleets of golden ships, then fire and destruction, entire worlds falling into silence. Kay pulled his hand back with a gasp. Naira stated him. "You saw what we lost," she said, "and what we must protect." Caleb looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not just as an alien or a royal, but as someone who had lost everything, just like he might have. "Then let's not let them take anything else," he said. They moved quickly. Now, with the directional ward, the ship's command uplink, where they could try to contact Earth or send a warning. But as they stepped into the next hallway, alarms blared. The Karns knew they were there. A second docking clamp had just locked on, and the countdown for airlock breach had begun. "We're out of time," Caleb said, as the ship's lights turned. "Read again." Ira stepped beside him, her voice calm. "Then we fight for what remains." The silence of space was broken no more. The hunt had begun. Caleb led the way through the narrow, half-lit corridor as red warning lights blinked along the edges of the walls, casting long, shifting shadows that moved with them. The sound of distant metal clanks echoed through the ship, each one closer than the last. Every step felt heavier, not just from the growing danger, but from the weight of questions that had no answers. Why was the alien princess really here? Why had the UN Resolute been chosen as her hiding place? And what else was hidden in the dead silence of the ship? Niera walked silently behind him, her glowing violet eyes sharp, her long silver fingers gripping the relic tight against her waist. The air was getting colder. Life support systems were breaking down across several decks, and Caleb knew it was only a matter of time before they lost power completely. He stopped at a junction and pulled up the emergency map from a flickering panel. A moment later, the screen sparked out, and he cursed under his breath. "There's a secondary relay hub 2 levels down," he said. "We fixed that. and we can restore the ship's internal sensors. Maybe even find out where the Karn probe is. Niara nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the shadows behind them. Not alone anymore, she whispered. Caleb didn't ask how she knew. He had already seen things today that science couldn't explain. They made their way to a maintenance shaft and climbed down into the darker, deeper levels of the ship. These lower corridors had not seen light in weeks. Debris was scattered across the floor, panels torn from walls, wires hanging like vines. Somewhere in the dark, something scratched against metal, slow, steady, not fast enough to be urgent, but constant, like it was following, but not rushing. Caleb moved faster. They reached the relay hub, and as Caleb opened the panel, Niara turned her back to him, watching the hallway like a silent guardian. The panel inside was a mess. Circuits were melted, and a strange black residue covered part of the board. This wasn't an accident, Caleb muttered. Someone damaged this on purpose. He began repairs while Niara moved quietly down the hall, placing her hand against the walls, like she could sense something through them. Caleb worked fast, his fingers moving through sparks and broken wires, and just as he made the final connection, the ship shook violently. A deep, hollow bang echoed through the floor, a sound that wasn't from the ship itself. There, here, Niara said. Caleb turned to see her staring toward the far end of the hallway. From the shadows came a low hum. Then a figure stepped forward. It wasn't a Karn soldier, it was another drone, but this one larger than before, its limbs thicker, its movements more careful, like it was hunting. Its eyes glowed red, and as it moved forward, it scanned the room and locked onto them. Get down, Caleb shouted. The drone fired a beam of white light that sliced through the air, hitting the wall behind them. Sparks exploded, and Niara rolled aside with inhuman speed, drawing a small device from her robe. She held it in front of her like a shield, and the next blast bounced off it, shattering a ceiling panel. Caleb grabbed a power rod and swung at the drone, hitting its side and throwing it off balance. The drone turned toward him, raising its weapon arm, but Niara darted forward and slammed her device into the drone's chest. A pulse of blue energy exploded outward, and the drone collapsed in a twitching heap. Caleb stared at it, breathing hard. What was that? He asked. Niara didn't answer at first. She was staring at the drone's remains. This was Varelian technology. But changed, she said. Someone took our machines and twisted them. Caleb stepped closer and looked at the drone's body. She was right. The structure was Varelian, but parts had been replaced, upgraded with Karn tech. They're using your own weapons against you, he said. Niara's face grew darker. Not just weapons, it's memories, language, defenses, all taken from my people. They erase what they do not control. Tension between them and the unseen enemy grew thicker. Caleb restored basic sensors through the relay, and a flickering map appeared on his wrist screen. A new signature had entered the ship, larger than the probes, too large for a drone. Karn boarding party. Caleb and Niara moved again, racing through the halls toward the ship's command uplink, now their only hope to send a warning to Earth. As they ran, the lights above flickered again, and shadows moved on their own. They passed through the science wing, now silent and cold, and entered a room filled with shattered glass and broken stasis pods. Caleb froze. Inside the pods had been humanoid figures, not human, not Varelian, but something else. Tease, warned crew, he said. Niara stepped forward, her hand trembling. Prisoners, she whispered, or test subjects. Someone on your ship was trying to awaken something ancient. Caleb stared at the broken pods. This ship wasn't just a science mission, he said. It was hiding something. Okay. Niara moved to a control panel and activated a message log. A human voice played back, broken and full of static. Subject 4 showed signs of connection. 2. The relic, ... Increase neural activity, ... Not stable. Hair changing, the log cut off with a sharp scream. Caleb turned to Nyara. What does the relic really do? She hesitated, then finally answered. It's not just a memory. It's a key, okay? A living code that can awaken technology hidden across the galaxy. If the Karns get it, they won't just destroy, they'll control everything that once belonged to us. Caleb felt cold. Suddenly, the relic she carried felt heavier, like it was more than just a crystal. It was the spark for a war that had already begun. A sound behind them made both turn. Another drone entered, this one smaller, but faster, and it launched itself at Nyara. She raised her shield device, but the drone struck hard, knocking her back. Caleb charged, using his plasma tool to blast the drone's leg. It fell, sparks flying, and Nyara finished it with a final strike. They stood in silence, surrounded by smoke and broken metal. Caleb reached down and helped her up. We can't keep fighting them like this, he said. We need to reach the command uplink, send a signal to Earth, and warn them before it's too late. Nyara nodded, her breathing steady. Then we move now. And together, they ran into the shadows once more, deeper into the ship's heart, where more secret sand, more danger waited in the dark. Caleb and Nyara moved through the main corridor, both of them silent, but alert as the pressure in the ship grew heavier with each passing moment, the deep hull groaning around them like a beast stirring in its sleep. They were close now, just a few levels away from the command uplink, where Caleb hoped they could send a warning to Earth, maybe even request help if there was still time. But the closer they got, the more unnatural everything felt. Lights flickered. With no rhythm, strange patterns formed on the walls, like shadows that didn't belong to anything, and the temperature kept shifting, hot one moment, freezing the next. Caleb checked his wrist screen and saw that life support was failing faster than expected, and in some sections it had already shut down completely. Nyara kept her hand near the relic as they walked, her steps careful and graceful. But Caleb could see the tightness in her shoulders and the way her eyes darted around at every sound. He knew she was afraid, even if she didn't show it, and he couldn't blame her. They were being hunted by machines, built from the ruins of her people and twisted by an enemy she thought was lost in the void. They reached the elevator shaft and climbed up the emergency ladder, their hands shaking with cold and exhaustion. When they reached the top, Caleb forced the hatch open and pulled Nyara through. The uplink chamber was just ahead, but it looked different now. Strange vines of black, synthetic material had spread across the walls, pulsing faintly with a red glow, like veins leading to something alive. Caleb stepped forward, ready to clear the path, but Nyara grabbed his arm and pulled him back. Wait, she whispered, and then he heard it, a low, steady humming sound, growing louder by the second. From the far corner of the corridor, a figure appeared. At first, Caleb thought it was another Karn drone, but as it stepped into the light, he saw something worse. It was human, partially, a crew member, or what used to be one, now merged with metal and alien tech. One eye glowed red, the other empty, and wires twisted out of its arms and neck like parasites feeding off a corpse. It walked slowly, but with purpose, and behind it came two more, each one more grotesque than the last. Atia, using the dead, Caleb said, his voice low with horror. They're turning them into weapons. Nyara nodded grimly. This is what the Karn do. They don't just conquer, they infect. Caleb knew they had to move fast. Key took Nyara's hand, and they slipped through a side hatch that led into a maintenance tunnel. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and the metal walls echoed every movement they made. Caleb felt like they were crawling through the ship's veins, heading toward its heart. As they moved, Nyara began to speak quietly. My people once believed in balance, she said. We built wonders, but we forgot how to defend them. When the Karn came, We thought peace would protect us. We were wrong." Her voice was calm, but Caleb could hear the pain beneath it. "You survived," he said. "You're stronger than they knew." She gave a faint smile. "Perhaps, but survival is not enough. We must stop them, or everything will fall." They reached the end of the tunnel and stepped into the uplink control room. It was dark, but mostly intact. Caleb rushed to the main console and began powering it up, using a backup cell he had carried since the first attack. As the lights blinked on and systems booted up, Niera stood by the door, keeping watch. Caleb typed fast, his hands shaking, and within minutes, the uplink was online, barely. "Signal's weak," he said, "but I can bounce it through the old satellite net. Maybe someone will hear us." He started recording the message, but before he could finish, the room shook violently. The walls trembled, and sparks rained from the ceiling. The Karn had found him. Nira moved fast, locking the doors and activating a field shield, but it would only hold 4 minutes. Caleb turned to her. "Buy me time," he said. She nodded once and took position at the center of the room. As the doors groaned under the weight of the Karn trying to break through, Niera raised the relic high above her head. Tia, the crystal pulsed with light, brighter than before, and suddenly a wave of energy burst from it, washing over the room. For a moment, Caleb felt like he was floating. Time stopped, and memories that weren't his flooded his mind again. Cities of light, vast ships, stars being born and dying. And then a voice come, ancient, not Niera, spoke in his mind. "You are not alone." The vision vanished, and Caleb fell back, gasping. Niera had dropped to one knee, the relic still glowing in her hands. "What was that?" Caleb asked. The relic reached out, she said, to anyone who might still be listening. Just then, the doors burst open, and the Karn drones charged in. Caleb raised his plasma tool, ready to fight, but before he could fire, something unexpected happened. A bright blue light filled the room, and from above, a transport ship appeared outside the main window, sleek, silver, not human, and not Karn. A voice crackled through the comms. "This is Eris of the Varelian Remnant. We received your signal. Hold position." Beams of light shot from the ship outside, striking the Karn drones with perfect precision. Each drone dropped, sparking and twitching as the beams burned through their systems. Within seconds, the room was silent again. Caleb stared in shock. "You said you were the last." Nira looked up, tears in her eyes. "I thought it was." The door opened, and 2 Varelians in battle armor stepped through. One knelt beside Niera and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We searched for you," he said. "The council believed you dead." Niera took a deep breath, then stood tall. Not dead, waiting. Caleb stepped back, unsure of his place in the moment, but Niera turned to him and smiled. "You gave us a second chance," she said. "Now let us give one to your people." Caleb nodded slowly. Somewhere deep in space, someone had heard their call, and the war was no longer one-sided. But as they looked out at the stars beyond, the shattered ship, they all knew the Karn would not stop. The battle had only just begun. The sound of humming engines filled the broken silence of the ship as Caleb stood near the shattered window, watching the sleek Varelian rescue craft hover just outside, its metallic body shining with soft blue light, casting long shadows over the remains of the uplink chamber where the last of the Karn drones had fallen. Smoke curled from the edges of the wreckage, and the air carried the sharp smell of melted circuits and scorched metal. Niera stood beside him, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight, her long robe torn and stained, the relic still glowing faintly in her hand. She was silent, but Caleb could see the weight pressing on her shoulders, the pressure of leadership, of memory, and of fear for what was still to come. The Varelians who had arrived were few, survivors of a hidden colony once thought destroyed. And though their presence brought hope, it also brought questions. Why had they waited? Why reveal themselves now? Caleb didn't trust coincidences anymore. The commander Eris, a tall and solemn figure with sharp features and a voice like smooth stone, approached them with urgency. "We have limited time," he said. "The Karn have traced the relic's signal, and they are coming in force. A mother ship is approaching from the Dark Zone, and this vessel cannot survive its weapons." Caleb turned to Nyara. "We need to leave." But she didn't move. Instead, she stared at the relic, her face pale. "They're not after the relic alone," she said. "They're after what it can unlock. Something still hidden inside this ship." Eris frowned. "Impossible. This ship is human. Your people never had access to Varelian vaults." Nyara looked up sharply. "Huh? What if they did?" A silence followed. Caleb remembered the stasis pods they had found earlier, those twisted, half-human experiments into the strange alien tech embedded deep in the ship's systems. "There's something buried here," he said slowly. "Something the Karn were searching for before we even knew about them." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a deep rumble shook the floor. An alarm echoed through the walls, one Caleb had never heard before. "Intrusion detected Deck 6, came the AI's voice, damaged and glitching. "Multiple heat signatures identified." Caleb and the others raced out of the chamber, following the emergency lights toward the lower decks. As they descended, the ship grew hotter, the air filled with a strange scent like burning air and charged plasma. When they reached Deck 6, they saw it. The wall had been torn open, exposing a chamber sealed behind thick alloy panels. The metal was ancient, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly. And inside was a sphere floating in the air, covered in moving patterns of light. 3 Karn soldiers, sleek, tall, their armor dark and pulsing, stood before it. God, they hadn't seen the group yet. Caleb ducked behind a broken pipe, watching as one of the Karn raised a device to the sphere. Nyara's eyes widened. "That's not just a vault," she whispered. "It's a seed, a world core. T holds the blueprint to build or destroy entire systems." Caleb's heart raced. "Damn, we can't let them take it." Eris signaled his troops to move, and in a swift, silent strike, the Varelians opened fire. Blue beams of energy lit up the hall as the Karn turned and returned fire. The chamber filled with smoke and light, the roar of weapons echoing through the broken ship. Caleb jumped in, using a metal rod to knock a drone back as Nyara raised the relic, sending a wave of light that pushed the last Karn soldier into the wall, disabling its armor. But the device it had activated kept glowing, and the sphere began to spin faster, humming louder. "It's destabilizing," Nyara shouted. "They tried to overload it." Eris moved forward and placed his hand on the sphere, chanting something in the old Varelian tongue. The light slowed, then dimmed, but a final pulse shot out, knocking everyone back. When Caleb opened his eyes, the chamber was quiet again. The Karn were gonna fade it into ash or taken by some teleportation, and the sphere now floated calmly. But in the center of the room, a figure stood where none had before. Not Karn, not Varelian, not human. It was tall, robed in shifting energy, its face hidden behind a smooth mask. Nyara gasped. The first one, Eris, dropped to one knee. "It's a guardian," he said. "It's one of the ancient makers." The figure spoke, not with a voice, but with thought. All of them heard it. "You seek peace where only fire remains. You awaken the seed without knowing the cost." Caleb stood slowly. "We were trying to stop the Karn." The figure turned toward him, and in doing so, you woke something older than them, something they once feared. Nyara stepped forward. "We need your help. The Karn won't stop." Apiga's mask tilted. You asked for help from those who left this galaxy in silence. The Varelians once guarded the balance. Now they are scattered, but one among you holds the path. It pointed to the relic. That is no weapon. It is a key to memory, to power, to war, or to peace. Caleb looked at Naira. She held the relic closer, her hands shaking. Tell us what to do. The figure stepped back. Only you can choose. But know this: what you do next will echo through stars unseen. With that, the figure faded, dissolving into light, and the chamber dimmed. Caleb, Naira, and Eris stood in silence, the relic glowing softly between them. The Karn were still coming. The war wasn't over. But now the fight had changed. The secrets of the ship had been revealed. The fire had awakened an ancient truth, and every step they took from now on would shape the future of more than just one world. Caleb tightened a grip on his tool. Then let's make the next step. Count. Naira nodded, and together they turned toward the stars, ready to face what came next. The silence in the ancient chamber was heavy as Caleb. Naira and Iris stood beneath the still floating sphere, its dim light casting strange patterns on the scorched metal floor. And, though the Karn threat had been pushed back for the moment, a new tension had taken its place in certainty. The kind that settles in the air when a choice has to be made, one that could decide the future of entire civilizations. Caleb's hand was still sore from gripping his tools so tightly during the last battle, and his mind buzzed with the strange voice of the Guardian that had appeared and vanished like a memory. The relic in Naira's hands pulsed with warmth, and she looked both shaken and stronger, as if the ancient energy inside her had awakened to something deeper. Stood, watchful, eyes narrowed as he studied the floating seed, aware that the Karn were regrouping somewhere in the dark, likely watching, possibly planning their next strike. Suddenly, a low vibration moved through the floor, followed by a distant rumble that didn't belong to the ship. Caleb rushed to a nearby console, wiped dust and debris from its cracked surface, and saw it. A Karn fleet, not one ship, but dozens, emerging from the dark zone like shadows spilling across the stars, and behind them, a massive construct shaped like a clawed wheeler world breaker, a ship that didn't just fight battles, but ended them. They're coming to take the seed, Caleb said grimly, and Eris gave a slow nod. If they get it, they won't just destroy Earth or the Varelian remnants, they'll rewrite the galaxy in their image. Naira stepped forward, lifting the relic higher, and as she did, the chamber around them responded. Walls shifting, lights rising, and a deep tone echoing from the sphere itself, which now spun slowly and projected a map: stars, its pathways, and something else, coordinates to a place hidden far beyond normal space, marked with a single Varelian word: Solara. Eris looked at the projection, and his face darkened. That's the Forge World, he said. It was a mythic place our ancestors sealed away, where the first cores were built. No one has dared to go there. Naira's voice was steady. The Karn have dared. If we don't reach it first, they will unlock the final key, and nothing will stop them. Caleb knew there was no choice. The relic had chosen them. The Guardian had warned them, and now the galaxy watched their next move. With the ship barely holding together, they boarded the Varelian cruiser and launched, leaving behind the wreckage of Caleb's old vessel, the place he once believed would be his tomb. The cruiser cut through space with grace, powered by ancient technology that responded to Naira's presence like a child to its mother. And as they neared Solara's coordinates, the stars seemed to bend and flicker, like they didn't want to be seen. They arrived at a dead system: no light, no warmth, just a dark void and a massive planet encased in rings of debris, like bones of machines orbiting a forgotten grave. The Forge World. As they approached, a defense grid powered up, but the relic glowed, signaling their right to pass. Deep below the surface, They descended into a world of wonders, towers made of crystal and steel, rivers of energy flowing between machines the size of cities, and at the center, a throne-like structure surrounded by 6 ancient cores each, one glowing with a different color. Niera stepped forward, and the cores lit up. These are the seeds of empires, she whispered. One can power a planet. All 6 can birth a new civilization. But before they could act, alarms blared. The Karn had arrived, slipping through the same path they had followed. And from orbit, their world breaker unleashed a storm of fire, blasting the surface and tearing into the outer chambers. Eris and his warriors rushed to defend the upper levels, while Caleb and Niera remained below, trying to activate the core array and seal the planet's defenses. Caleb worked fast, guided by the relic and old Varelian instructions, Kay's hands dancing over controls made for another species, while Niera channeled energy through the relic to awaken the central structure. Outside, the storm grew worse. Eris's last message crackled over the comms. They're breaking through. Stall them. ... Even a few minutes. Then silence. Caleb looked at Niera. We're alone. She shook her head. We never were. The sphere above them burst into light, revealing an interface 6 slots, each awaiting a core. Caleb placed the relic into the center slot, and Niera took a deep breath and placed her hands on the glowing panels. Energy surged. The planet responded. Towers lit up, engines hummed to life, and a beam of light shot into the sky, striking the Karn worldbreaker and cracking its outer shell. But then the chamber shook violently. Karn warlord, taller than any they had seen, clad in dark armor fused with flesh, dropped into the room through a broken ceiling. Its voice was low and cruel. You awaken fire you cannot control. Seed belongs to the true rulers. Caleb stepped in front of Niera, holding only a plasma cutter, while she kept the core activation going. The warlord struck with brutal speed, but Caleb dodged, using the broken floor and falling debris as cover. He knew he couldn't win, not in a fight, but he could distract, delay, give Niera time. She cried out as the warlord broke through the last barrier and reached for the core. But in that moment, the sphere exploded with energy, and Niera's body lifted into the air, glowing with pure light. The warlord screamed as the energy pierced its armor, tearing it apart. When it was over, Niera collapsed, the relic dim but intact. Caleb caught her. She opened her eyes, slowly. A D-Forge is awake, she whispered. It chose us. The planet began to shift, its systems rebuilding, preparing to rise not as a weapon, but as a beacon. Above, the Karn fleet was retreating, damaged and leaderless, and in their place, ships from other corners of the galaxy began to outroll allies of the Varelians, hidden civilizations, humans from colonies, thought lost. The signal had gone out. The spark had been lit. Caleb looked at the sky, then at Niera, and knew that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. A new empire, not of domination, but of survival, unity, and hope. The Forge world turned slowly beneath them, its fires no longer hidden, and as Caleb stood at the heart of it all, he realized something. He had believed he was alone in the cold silence of space, but in truth, he had only been waiting for a purpose, a people, and a future worth fighting for.